Rescue Story. Rescue Team Saves Camel from Swarm of Poisonous Bees. The wind that morning was gentle, moving across the dunes like breath over glass. But beneath its calm came another sound. Low, broken, and strangely human. The rescue jeep rolled to a stop. The men listened again. There it was. A faint groaning, deep and drawn out, fading into silence before returning like a cry swallowed by distance. They followed it, walking slowly, the sand sinking beneath their boots. At the base of a small ridge, they found him. A camel, large, tan, and trembling, lay half-collapsed in the sand. His long lashes were clotted, his skin rippled with pain. Around him the sand was scattered with dark dots. At first they looked like seeds. Then one of the rescuers knelt closer. "Bees," he murmured. "Hundreds of them. Tiny, lifeless, their bodies curled tight from the sting of their own venom. The air still carried the bitter tang of their swarm, faint but unmistakable. The camel's skin bore the marks, raised welts, swelling under the sun, patches of hair matted where the insects had gathered. He tried to move, but his knees folded again. A low moan escaped him. Long, trembling, almost like a plea. The team acted without words. One man fetched a cloth soaked in cool water. Another mixed a weak saline solution. Every motion was slow, deliberate. The desert was hot enough to burn through thought. Here, only care mattered. They poured water along his neck, over the sores, watching the dust turn to paste and run off. The camel's breathing slowed, not calm, but less frantic. One rescuer whispered softly. His voice carried a rhythm like wind over stone. Bees rarely attacked like this. It must have been an accident. A hive disturbed, perhaps near the sparse acacia trees a few dunes away. The scent of sweat or movement might have drawn them. In the heat, every sound could turn wild. A few meters away, a plastic water jug lay overturned. Maybe from a passing traveler. Maybe from him. No one would ever know. As the sun lowered, the rescue team set up a small shade tarp. They draped damp cloths over the camel's body, easing the sting. His eyes flickered open once more, faintly reflecting the color of the sky. For a long while, no one spoke. Only the slow hiss of the wind moved across the desert floor, carrying with it the soft sound of breathing, the fragile rhythm of a creature who had survived something meant to kill. The day ended not with words, but with stillness, the kind that feels almost sacred, when life hangs in the balance and strangers become caretakers under a dying sun. Night crept over the dunes without sound. The horizon dimmed from gold to ash, then to deep indigo as stars spilled across the desert sky. The wind cooled, soft and dry, brushing over the tents and the still figure beneath them. The camel, now covered with a rough blanket, lay motionless except for the faint rise and fall of his chest. Each breath was shallow but steady. Around him the rescue team moved in quiet rhythm, pouring small bowls of water, mixing herbs from their medical kit, brushing away the flies that gathered at the wounds. The desert, which had burned all day, now turned almost tender. The sand held the memory of heat, enough to keep him warm through the night. A rescuer sat nearby, his hands resting loosely on his knees. He watched the animal's sides move in slow waves, his thoughts still and wordless. Once, the camel stirred. His long neck trembled, trying to lift, but the effort failed. A soft grunt escaped him, hoarse and raw. The rescuer reached out, voice barely above a whisper. "RMC." "It's all right." He poured water gently along the camel's muzzle. The animal's cracked lips moved, tasting it, his tongue flicking weakly. It was a small thing, but it carried the weight of hope. From time to time the men checked his pulse, slow but holding. They rubbed ointment along the swelling, careful not to cause more pain. In the silence they could hear the hum of the desert, crickets, distant and few, and the low breath of wind shaping the dunes again. Hours passed. The moon climbed higher, pale and weightless, throwing silver over the sand. The shadows of the rescuers stretched long and thin beside the camel's body. No one slept. Around midnight, something shifted. The camel's legs twitched, then drew closer to his body, a small instinctive curl as if reclaiming warmth. His breathing deepened. One of the rescuers caught it first and smiled faintly. "He's fighting," he murmured. The others nodded, their faces lit softly by the lantern's glow. They took turns fanning away the insects, keeping the wounds cool. Every act was simple, almost ritual. The desert seemed to listen, patient, unjudging. By dawn, the air was still again. The horizon began to pale and the stars thinned like fading embers. The first light touched the camel's flank, revealing skin no longer so inflamed, the swellings dulling in color. When a rescuer brushed his neck, the camel flinched, not from pain, but awareness. His eye opened, round and dark, reflecting the sky's pale edge. For the first time, he exhaled deeply. The sound carried across the sand, not strong, but alive. The rescuers sat quietly, watching the light move across his body. No one spoke. The desert no longer felt endless. It felt vast enough to hold a fragile kind of peace. In the hush before morning broke, they knew he would live to see the sun again. Morning came quietly, like a secret being kept. The sun had not yet climbed far, and the dunes glowed pale gold, brushed with the cool breath of dawn. Around the small camp, the night's silence began to lift, a rustle of wind, the creak of canvas, a bird's single cry. The rescuers moved slowly, weary from the long watch. One man poured the last of the water into a shallow tin bowl. Another checked the camel's flank. The swelling had eased, the harsh redness now softened to the color of old clay. The ointment had done its work through the night. The camel stirred. His long lashes flickered, catching the morning light. He lifted his head with effort, nostrils flaring, the breath rasping but sure. The rescuers stepped closer, their movements cautious, reverent almost. "Easy. Take your time," one whispered. The camel shifted again, his front knees pressing against the sand. For a moment he trembled, his weight uncertain before pushing himself upright. The sound was rough, hooves grinding into the dune, but when he finally stood, the world seemed to still. The rescuers did not cheer. They only watched. The camel swayed, steadying himself, his tall frame framed by the growing light. His chest rose and fell deeply. A small sigh left him, almost human in its relief. Then, as if guided by some ancient memory, he turned toward the open desert. A faint trail of hoofprints from the day before marked the direction of his herd, faint but visible across the low ridges. The rescuers followed a few steps, then stopped. One of them reached out and brushed the air gently as if in blessing. "Jiao." "Garjiao," he said softly. "Go home." The camel paused, his ears flicking toward the sound. For a breath his gaze held theirs. Not in fear, not in thanks, but in recognition. Then he began to walk, slow and steady, leaving the camp behind. Each step pressed a mark into the damp morning sand. Behind him the rescuers gathered their few things: empty jugs, the folded tarp, the cloths now stiff with salt and dust. The work was done. There was nothing left to save, nothing left to hold on to. When they finally looked up again, the camel was halfway across the plain, his shape blurred by distance. The sunlight touched his back, outlining him in gold. Soon he would find his herd again, drawn by scent, sound, or simply the pull of belonging that no wound could erase. The team stood in silence. The desert had already begun to erase their footprints, smoothing the sand where they had knelt. Only the faint trace of life remained, a memory written in shifting earth. As the jeep engine started, a gust of warm air swept across the dunes, carrying with it the smell of salt and sun. One rescuer turned for a final look, the camel now only a moving speck against the horizon. He smiled, barely. Somewhere in the great quiet, a life had returned to its path, and the desert, vast and indifferent, seemed for a moment to breathe with them.